And welcome, YouTubers. Now we're live both on Facebook and on YouTube, and we're talking about Parashath Tol'doth this week, 5780. It's the same parsha it was last year. Just to, I guess, date this current broadcast. We're still in political limbo here in Israel, and although it's Rosh Chodesh, tonight is the first night of Kislev, 5780. Happy Rosh Chodesh. Only 3 weeks and 3 days until Hanukkah, although we're still in some sort of political limbo. And after Rosh Chodesh, we're going to probably have to fast because there's been very little rain around here. It started promising, even in Tishrei there was some rain, but now we have a little bit of a problem. It's been a little bit dry, so we'll hope for the best now. This week's parsha, I was thinking a little bit how one of the themes I'd written about and spoke about in years past was rejection, becoming chosen, and the rejection. Specifically, there's a pattern that leads up to in the middle of the book of Exodus, where all the firstborn are rejected from God's service, and the Levites, and specifically the Kohanim, are brought in to replace them. And that reflects a pattern that we see throughout this book. Now, when someone is chosen, it's sort of directly explicated through some sort of means. God lets it be known. For example, Seth is the one that Adam says explicitly, this is the one who's most like me. Havel was killed, and Cain is rejected. He is banished from before God. Noach is basically told that he's the only survivor. Noach declares prophetically that his third son is a reject, and his second son is going to be granted God's favor, so to speak. That's Shem. Abraham is bidden to leave his family explicitly. Abraham is then told to banish Ishmael, because Isaac is the chosen one, and so forth. Eventually, although Ephraim does not completely replace Menashe, Ephraim does take Menashe's place as a firstborn. That's explicit. That's given, Jacob told him that specifically. And Reuben's banishment from the firstborn and having the firstbornhood and having his share and his privileges divided up among his more worthy brothers is also quite explicit. But this week's parsha, we encounter something else that's a little bit more harder to see, and that's Esav's rejection. Esav is not chosen, but God does not come down to Isaac and tell him that. As a matter of fact, the way most Mefarshim, the interpreters, understand this parsha, they see Isaac as holding out the hope that Esav is somehow part of the bigger picture. They also seem to take it for granted that it was obvious that Yaakov was part of that picture. The only question was, to what extent? Would he be working with Esav? Would he be working underneath Esav? Would he be working alone? And for some reason, this was clear to Rebecca, their mother, who did get an advanced message that the nations that would come forth for them would be in conflict, but she did not tell her husband. And it seems that she didn't tell her sons either until she had to. And although Isaac was holding out hope, eventually he came to accept this fact very clearly, because once again, it seemed he was holding out hope. Just God didn't tell him, no, Jacob is the chosen one. Esav is an unfortunate reject. And I'm using that word only because I don't have a better nomenclature for this type of thing. But Isaac held out hope until he realized suddenly, oh, Jacob actually got the blessing. I guess it's true. We're going to have to call a spade, Esav. You can't be part of this because you just don't have it. And maybe it seemed obvious, perhaps even to Jacob himself. This was something that's so obvious that when the two twins were young men, according to the Midrash, they were only 15 when Jacob made the hasty and wise decision, and when Esav made the conversely hasty and unwise decision to sell his birthright to Jacob. Even then, Esav was wondering what his birthright has to be, and Jacob himself realized, I have to step in and do something about this because it's quite clear. You don't even need God to tell us this. I need to do something, take this into my own hands. And that's sort of unfortunate. But like we also discussed in years past, we all have twin brother Esav. Uh, Esav is this close to Yaakov. Esav could have been, but for whatever reason, the personality traits that he had brought him off, did not allow him to stay part of this. Ironically, similar personality traits we see in Reuven also nearly ruined it for him. And Jacob himself, according to the Midrash, was worried about this up until his last day, but he realized, yeah, Reuven cannot be the official firstborn in name only, but not in privilege. But he's still not a reject, thank God. And that is an important idea that we should be thinking about in these weeks. The Jewish people being chosen doesn't make us better. That's explicit in Deuteronomy. It just gives us more responsibility. It comes with its pluses and its minuses. It comes with more commandments. It comes with more responsibility. Also, like the Kohanim, when God tells the Kohanim they have to do their responsibilities in the sanctuary, it's actually a threat. He says also they're under greater stress and in greater danger of coming close to the sanctuary, and that's why they have to keep other people away, because it's getting close to the holiness, living in the land of Israel, let's say as a nation, serving in the temple as a group, is inherently more dangerous. One has to be held to higher standards, and if one cannot keep up the standards, he's inviting punishment upon himself. So food for thought. This week's Parashah, of course, they're fighting over, once again, the blessing. The blessing is who gets to inherit the land of Israel. The running theme of the Bible is, and always was, that God gave the land of Israel to the Jews in order to found a Jewish state there and keep his commandments. And that's what we are supposed to be doing. And that's what we're going to see in most of these parashiyot. Let's go back now. I'm just finishing up an article here. I have made it very clear. I do not like the website, thetorah.com. I also think it's very misleading that they call themselves that. I think that if the Torah could, or if it's true representatives of the Torah could sue thetorah.com for misrepresentation or something, whatever the legal term is, and have them at least change their name, if not stop what they're doing, then they should. One article that's been bothering me for a few weeks is this one where Dr. Bar Cohn, not Cohen, he spells it, there's no vowel after the H, has written basically trying to say that Shmini Atzeret, which is the last day of the Tabernacles Festival, Sukkoth, the 8th day, which is here, is also Simchat Torah. So he says that somehow that was an invention in Second Temple times, and then it was retconned into a few biblical sources. It's somehow it was they divide the Torah like this. They say that there's Vayikra and Bamidbar, Numbers and Leviticus, not respectively, were written by two different sources, and then there's the Deuteronomic source that was, of course, none of this was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. It's like three authors among others, and Deuteronomy doesn't mention Shmini Atzeret. Well, neither does Exodus, by the way, because it just says in passing in Bamidbar and Vayikra. Those books provide more detail of the holidays, so you'd expect to find it there. But he says that somehow or other this was not around, even when they were writing the Pentateuch. And then because, and this is the part he doesn't explain, because Shmini Atzeret became a thing, they had to retcon it first into the Book of Kings and then to the Book of Chronicles, which describes what actually happened on Shmini Atzeret when they dedicated the first temple. And that's how it got into those two books. And then that was further retconned into Vayikra and Bamidbar, both of which mention Shmini Atzeret as part of the general holiday. And for some reason they still left it out of Deuteronomy. They decided to go back and fix that. And aside from the fact that historically this doesn't make much sense, because you could check, as I wrote now, you could check with the Samaritans. The Samaritans only have basically what we call the Torah. Why? Because they're split from traditional Judaism. Either they claim to actually be some Israelites, which doesn't fit what everybody else has been saying about history. Even the Gentiles have been familiar with them. They know that's just a Baba Misa they've made up in the last centuries. Even in Second Temple times, they were not claiming to be native Jews, but the people who were brought there by the Assyrian conquerors in order to replace the native Israelite tribes. And the Samaritans, therefore, do not accept later biblical books. Anything that basically is past the book of Joshua, and even the book of Joshua, they don't really hold. Yet their Bible, which they would have received basically when around the time of the latter first temple, when the 10 tribes officially went to exile, or when they claimed to have split off. So they actually have Shmini Atzeret in their books of Vayikra and Bamidbar. Yes, their Pentateuch has many differences between ours. Most of them are actually in just little words. It's not many of them are not as significant in this regard. You could go do a comparison, but it's not significant enough that it's actually a different document. And they have Shmini Atzeret, which means that whoever invented Shmini Atzeret in Second Temple times, when the Samaritans were already existing as a separate group with a different religion and even a hostility toward those of us who have kept what we're familiar with as Judaism, they have Shmini Atzeret. So somehow, when this whole Shmini Atzeret prank was foisted on us, and it was then retconned into first our books of the prophets and then part of our Pentateuch, they also went and convinced the Samaritans to adopt this. And of course, this is ridiculous. And I'm surprised that Bar Cohn, who is a professor at Bar Ilan, that no one of his usually these things should be peer reviewed. He should, have it reviewed by someone who just knows a little bit of history and a little bit of actually Bible criticism. Even for Bible criticism, this stuff is pretty bad. It doesn't have any intellect, anything good about it. And yeah, so that basically rips it apart. But I guess we have to answer a question: Where does Shmini Atzeret come from? What is Shmini Atzeret? And also ask another question, God willing: why is it that Passover and Sukkot are actually different? Let's assume, like we do, Passover is a 7-day holiday. So the first day is a Yom Tov, and the second day is a Yom Tov, and there's Chol Moed in the middle. And Sukkot is 8 days long. First day is Yom Tov, and the first day is Yom Tov. Once again, it's bookended. And the middle 6 days are Chol Moed, at least here in the land of Israel. We're not going to deal with Yom Tov Sheni. Sukkot is a day longer. Yet, also, that 8th day of Sukkot, the last day, is considered a separate holiday in different respects. It's always tacked on. That is, Passover we hear about, it's a 7-day holiday. First day special, the 7th day special. Yet, when describing Sukkot, the Bible says, Sukkot is also a 7-day holiday. And on the 8th day, you have a Yom Tov or a Mikra Kodesh or a Natzera, the day you don't do work. It's kind of odd. First, they're telling us there's the 7-day festival, and then there's an 8th day. So that's kind of strange. It's a strange language. And the sages actually point this out. The sages say in Masechet Sukkah that this is actually quite intentional. Shmini Atzeret we view as a separate holiday in 6 different ways. It's connected to Sukkot. If someone were going on pilgrimage, there's no way you can actually separate the two, because the last day of Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, that we now call it, immediately leads into Shmini Atzeret. They're inseparable, but there are differences, among the sages realized in 6 different ways. There's a mnemonic there. The blessing is different, etc. You say Shechianu, it's a different korban, etc. But that's not so significant. We have to explain why this would be different. And God willing, next week we will answer these questions, or you could just check out the article, because it's worth actually seeing and understanding. Now let's get back to Hebrew calendar ideas. We were talking about Zamanim. We mentioned that there's the way of the Gaonim to divide the day into 12, and they basically calculate from sunrise to sunset. And the Magen Avraham realized, or at least he claimed, because we were following Rabbeinu Tam's opinion for a while, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, the day starts from dawn, which is significantly before sunrise, and ends at when the stars come out, which would be nightfall, which is significantly after sunset. We should actually calculate the 12 hours of the day between those things. And it's important to calculate the 12 hours a day because, for example, you have to finish reading Shema by 3 seasonal hours of the day. And ideally, you should finish your morning prayers by 4 hours. And for most other things, the hours don't really matter. You could technically continue praying your morning prayer at least until when it's halachically noon, and you could start mincha a half an hour after it's halachically noon. So you don't need so hours before that. But there's also the idea of when, for example, on Erev Pesach, you have to get rid of your chametz. When's the last time, or as the rabbi used to say, the deadline for eating the chametz and the deadline for burning the chametz. It's not really a deadline, but it's humorous nonetheless. And when this would have to work, the Magen Avraham opinion about how to divide up the day basically adds 144 minutes to each day, and therefore 12 minutes to each and every hour of that day. Although it is not necessarily it's not necessary, according to the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, for example, that you have to calculate your hours this way, according to Magen Avraham. Even if you say that the day starts at dawn, well before sunrise, and ends at nightfall, well after sunset, it doesn't mean that the 12 seasonal hours are calculated that way. Really, it means you could say Shema starting at dawn, and then you have 3 hours from sunrise. You still calculate the hours that way. Now let's describe the things that we would encounter on any given day. Mitzvahs that you have to do by day start at dawn. Technically speaking, by dawn, if you're in a pinch, you could say your Shema and also pray your morning prayer by dawn. Ideally, the morning prayer is supposed to coincide with sunrise, and therefore Shema should be about 6 minutes before sunrise, and then afterwards, there's still more time to say both of those, and all the other mitzvahs of the day can also be done around that time. But there is a caveat for putting on the tzitzit, the talit, and tefillin, or the time for putting on tefillin. The sages ordained that is at the time when a person can recognize his friend at a certain distance, or when he could tell the difference between his different types of tzitzit strings, because, of course, nowadays we have renewed the commandment to have a blue string of woolen, a blue woolen string also among our white strings on our tzitzis, and the question is when you could see the difference. And the sages actually gave that very subjective standard, I believe, because it was meant to be subjective. Nowadays, they asked great scholars of the 20th century what their belief is. How long before sunrise is it before you could actually recognize your friend outside? And of course, that would depend on a lot of atmospheric conditions. That would depend on the fact on whether or not there's moonshine, and that does make a difference. Wake up really early and you'll see it, especially in the third week of the month, when the moon is quite large and it's always up at the last part of the night. You go out at that part, it looks kind of light, even an hour before sunrise, so it's quite light out, just because of the moon. So that makes a difference. Yet they were asked and they gave their opinions, and that's what we find in the Luach. There's no real Talmudic derivation about when it is that you can actually recognize your friend. I don't, here where I live, I wouldn't put on my talis or tefillin until 35 minutes before sunrise. I'm very machmir, and that's kind of funny. So sometimes I wake up early and I see everybody else is already putting on their talis or tefillin 50 minutes before. I don't know how, but then again, I've been wearing glasses now for well over 20 years. So maybe if I had better eyes, I would realize that. Maybe I could put on my talis and tefillin earlier. Okay. The next time, of course, is Kriyat Shema. A person should say Kriyat Shema in the morning. He has 3 hours of the day to do that. If it was a perfect equinox day from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and each seasonal hour was as long as a regular hour, then you'd have until 9 a.m. to say Shema. Ideally, until 10 a.m. to say Shemona Esrei. Although that's also certainly not as concrete as the last time for saying Shema, because as I said, you have until noon. Mincha is half an hour after noon, halachic noon. That's Mincha Gedolah. There is an opinion. Maimonides, for example, says that the ideal time for Mincha is actually Mincha Ketana, which is 9.5 hours after the sunrise, or 9.5 seasonal hours. That corresponds to the ideal time for offering the Tamid in the temple. The times that we have for prayer, not for Shema, the times for prayer are meant to coincide ideally with the times that they would offer the sacrifices in the temple. And therefore, there is an idea that Musaf, which is offered after the morning sacrifice, has to be sometime after sunrise. Technically speaking, you do it quite soon afterwards. If they have a day like Rosh Chodesh, before they used to have the saying of the Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, they would read the Torah quickly, and then they could even start Musaf as quickly as 10 minutes after sunrise. That's totally fine. And they say ideally one should offer Musaf by, let's say, 7 hours of the day when it's time to do Mincha already, because Musaf should be before Mincha. So that's why you see in the calendar is an ideal time for Musaf. And then Mincha continues until the end of the day. And next week, next week we're going to talk about the issue of the ideal time for Arvit, which is actually quite complicated. We'll see some opinions, the Shulchan Aruch's opinion, the Rambam's opinion, what people actually do, and then we'll talk about receiving the Sabbath also. There's what to say about that. So please like, share, subscribe, send your questions, comments, and any other feedback, and we'll see you next week.